Hey!
Yo, what's up, dude?
Yeah, so you're vegan?
I'm not vegan actually, but Ask Yourself server is in my sphere of Discord debate servers. I want to give you props on the Destiny debate. That shit was fucking hilarious and embarrassing for Destiny, I'm certain.
Which one? I debated him many times.
Monday, I was listening on Monday about the honesty of the media. That was fucking
Oh,
ridiculous.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
holy shit. Yeah, I mean, you go down the list. Like 1 week ago, the media was lying and saying that Miami protests are Cuban citizens protesting. It's just insane. But okay, so I guess to get to the point, because you cut into the chase. But I was listening. So I was listening to that debate live, and my impression when you gave when you went down the second line of reasoning, something or other like the argument was, if you live in society, you'll necessarily have developed some moral system, some understanding of good and bad, and that therefore, if he doesn't understand what you're saying, or understand your system of good and bad, then he's lying necessarily. And I think right there, there's some kind of conflation between some system of good and bad and understanding your particular sense of good and bad.
Um, so the reason I disagree with that is because my sense of good and bad is going to result from reflexive contemplation of good and bad, right? But functionally speaking, it's not actually relevant what my sense of good and bad is.
Hmm.
Like, for
But
example, if I say that uh let's say that cow, since we're talking about cows earlier, that cow is bad, right? I may
okay,
have a specific view of bad and good, and actually I may as an individual have a specific sense of good and bad that is uniquely me as an individual alone, right? But insofar as I'm communicating that socially, my specific view is not relevant. It's not, it may be relevant objectively, but functionally speaking, it is not relevant.
dude, that I don't
I
know. To
sorry,
me,
sorry,
that
not functionally. To clarify what I meant functionally speaking, in terms of the statement I am trying to convey to another person, it is not relevant.
you mean the feelings behind the statement or something like that?
Let me put it like this. So let's say I say that guy is bad, right?
Yeah, he's a bad guy. Okay.
So ultimately, why I am saying he is bad, may come from something only specific to me and my specific view of good and bad. That may be true. But insofar as I'm conveying that information to another person, this uniqueness that I may have, my specific view of good and bad, is not relevant.
That's confusing to me. Do you have can you elaborate on what you mean by it's not relevant? What you mean by bad when you say something is bad? Because I think that's pretty much the whole point, isn't it? When you say
My
something is
my
bad, you're
specific view of good and bad is not relevant.
why
It may
do you say
ultimately
that?
be proved to be relevant insofar as the question is why am I saying that? But it's not relevant to convey what I mean by that to another person. So for example, you are, what's your name? Chum. Chum, you have
Yeah,
a idea of good and bad. I have an idea of good and bad. They are radically at odds, let's say, right?
sure. Okay.
Um the only way we can arrive at the relevance of this difference between us is by developing the content. So if I say
Okay.
I'm a guy who thinks big booty bitches are good, and you're a guy who thinks I like big
The titties.
titties, they're
Yeah.
yeah, good and bad not relevant. Okay, you have
Right.
to say you like this, you like that, and then you will arrive at what good means to this person or what bad means to that person.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean that's fine. I think that that kind of would fall into like a subjectivist or like a moral non-realist kind of view.
Well,
Um,
it's interesting because I was accused of the opposite yesterday, but no, I don't think so. Because my point is trying to say is that what bad means for an individual is not premised by the way in which they contemplate the meaning of the word bad. It's actually only manifesting in what they are calling good and what they are calling bad. The underlying reason for that is not going to be identical to the reason they arrive at by means of reflexive contemplation. So I think the confusion comes from the inability to recognize that discontinuity. There's a discontinuity between what we actually think is bad and the way we try to reflexively make sense of why we think it's why we uh use the word
right.
bad.
No, I understand. I think the concept of like reflexive reasoning is pretty interesting. And so I was asking Chad earlier, and you can confirm: is this like Lacanian psychoanalysis, Lacanian?
Yeah, what's that?
Are you is your reasoning that you're giving here? Is it like a Lacanian psychoanalysis
No,
explanation?
not specifically. I think this distinction we're working with will you will already find it in German idealism. But I think if anything, it should be most reminiscent of Heidegger, right? Because for Heidegger is the one whose basic contribution to thought is this idea that we are already in some kind of we are already beings
Right.
before we ascribe form to being, right? So it's mostly, if you have to blame someone, probably Heidegger would be the best.
Blame. Oh, okay. I don't know if I would put it that way, but all right. So idealism makes me think that. Well, you did mention that you're religious. And idealism has its own like really interesting challenges. I'm not super
So,
up on
so
philosophy or anything.
by German idealism, I don't necessarily mean idealism as a philosophical or metaphysical position. I mean like the school of thought that begins from Kant, spans through Fichte and Schelling, and goes through Hegel and so on and so on. Ends with Hegel. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I thought that idealism was the idea that the universe exists in the mind of God, and it takes a mind to sustain existence in reality. Is that
That's a
am
very
I off
low.
base there?
Well, it's a really loaded way of interpreting idealism, but German idealism is just referring to as historical school of thought.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess with that out of the way, so I gave my thoughts there, and I guess we can have the more substantial bit of it, which is so you say, well, I don't know. It seems like an edgy position to get the conversation started. Vegans are bad people, and then I would ask, why do you say that vegans are bad people?
Sure. Great. Yeah, I think vegans are bad people because they don't actually accomplish elevating animals to the level of human beings. They only accomplish degrading human beings to the level of animals. And thus, they end up opening the floodgates to being able to have a kind of psychotic and sociopathic view toward other human beings because, well, it's all the same. We're already treating animals like shit. I'll give you an example of this. I recently saw a debate where a guy was asked if you saw a chicken suffering and you saw a human child suffering, which
Mhm.
one would bother you more? And the guy said, the chicken would bother me more because a chicken is innocent, unlike a human baby who will one day grow up to consume a lot
Oh,
of
it was a
meat.
baby. It wasn't a person.
Sorry?
It was a baby that was suffering, and not a person. Because you said person.
No, no.
Was
There's a chicken suffering and a baby
a baby?
human,
Okay.
human baby suffering.
Yeah, that's really weird. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know what to say to that. So what do you think about so forget the moral ethicist like animal rights view of veganism. If we look at it strictly from like a survival standpoint, if we talk about meat consumption as it relates to global warming, do you place significance on global warming as like something to be avoided, carbon emissions something to be avoided?
It implies we have the power to avoid it. I take a pessimistic view as far as climate change is concerned. I think the climate change is inevitable.
Okay.
There's no way to stop it.
Well, when you say okay, so when you say that climate change is inevitable, uh, do you mean just that humans don't have the capacity to reduce our carbon emissions and reverse and like create an economy that's like sustainable or something like that, or that sequesters carbon, all that stuff?
Uh, According to the laws of physics, we do, right? But if human beings were as simple as physics, well, we wouldn't even be in the mess we're in now in the first place. So
Uh huh. So
physically,
you,
it's physically possible, but
uh-huh.
you cannot. I reject the view according to. I reject. Let me talk about Hegel again. Hegel describes this view about the individual who arrives at the true position, in spite of the fact that everyone uh, ignores
Right.
them. They stay true to their position, and Hegel calls this the beautiful soul. Hegel critiques
Uh-huh.
this, and he says the world is the way it is for a reason. So for Hegel, all that is real is rational. Um,
Hmm.
why
But
it
you're a
is,
communist, right?
of course,
Okay. And I have communist sympathies. I see myself as like a leftist. I'm not sure what label to give myself, but
yeah.
I have a lot of communist sympathies. But so I would say like so communism has this radical vision for transformation of society and transformation of the planet and class relations. And what do you think is different between that kind of defeatist view towards global warming versus somebody that has a defeatist view towards the hegemony of neoliberalism and corporate capitalism?
Because the type of communist that I am is a Marxist and scientific socialist. So for this type of communist, uh, this transformation that is being envisioned is not a voluntary transformation that results from implementing a subjective vision we have, but from a vision we perceive the world to be going in the direction of already. So, from the scientific socialist perspective, you can say communism is inevitable. It's not going to happen at the expense of our subjectivity, but um, with the development of the forces of production and the increased socialization of labor, communism acquires the force of objectivity. So to me, I don't I don't have a
Mhm.
prescriptive view of communism. Like communism is true and we must impose this true vision upon the world. It's not the Marxist view of what communism is.
Okay. So in the same way uh that it's deterministic that like socialism will win, communism, the workers will take over the means of production and retool society into this utopian vision.
No,
You also see
they will not. They will not real tool society voluntarily. So the idea for Marxism is that freedom, and freedom in this case is the freedom to implement policies and do all these kinds of things. Freedom consists only freedom consists. Thank you for the bits, Jay Lawrence. Freedom is only insight into necessity. You don't change the world because of some utopian vision you have. You perceive the contradictions, material contradictions, whether in the forces of production or in society at large, and you participate in the development of those contradictions toward uh, their
yeah,
sublation, their ultimate sublation. So
yeah,
the communist does not say the workers will take over and implement a utopian society. Um, it will still very much be our society. And to the extent that it's different, is the same extent to which society possesses the seeds of its own transformation into something different.
sure. I understand. That reminds me of when I was listening to Caleb Maupin, how he was saying that when we create socialism in America, it's going to be American socialism. It's not going to
Precisely.
be German or Russian socialism. So I understand, and um, but that was what I was describing there when I was saying, maybe I probably didn't describe it in a way that you would agree to, but I said that that the workers are going to retool society in their utopian vision, or at least make their attempt to. And towards the end of your statement there, you were talking about people participating in in the society in that way, in that transformation. Um, but I think like so even if it's, let's say it's futile or whatever, let's say it's futile to stop global warming. I don't think that it is, and I think that a vision of transforming the world and society, you know, it would also necessitate transforming our relations to production in respect to making them sustainable. But even if it's futile, right? Like let's say attempting to fight global warming, we get an extra 100 years out of the planet or something. I think that that would be worth it, regardless.
Well,
Whether it's futile or not. That effort and that
yeah,
struggle.
beyond this philosophical conversation, just because I think it's futile doesn't mean I think nothing. Communists have no task in relation to it. I think the program of communists in relation to global warming must be one of adjustment. We have to prepare humanity to adjust the new
The
climate
new
and
reality.
the new reality. Precisely, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is where I think the heroic task of overcoming this obstacle lies. I don't think we're going to change the overall trend of the planet, especially when the industrialization of India and Africa is not even in the first stage, and industrialization looks ugly when you can already take it for granted. But for people who don't have access to clean drinking water and electricity and
Yeah,
air
no,
conditioning, and it is of
those things are
vital,
important.
yeah, it is of vital necessity. So,
Yeah, and I wouldn't be against transforming Africa and Asia and third and second world countries to be more industrialized and
well, I
you know
just
it.
think it's not so much that we will do it ourselves, but they will do it. We cannot stop them from doing it.
Yeah, that's fine. I just think like so for example when we're talking about cutting down on CO2 emissions, Western countries, Europe and America specifically, emit a tremendous amount of CO2 atmosphere.
They
Uh,
do. American consumption patterns very clearly responsible, big part of the carbon.
and especially the wealthy too.
Of course, but you have to also understand that a huge part of these emissions are coming from industrializing countries as well, China and other countries and so on, Russia.
Yeah.
Um, I think the priority is not so much flatly reducing emissions in general, which I don't think is a sustainable path, but reducing the harmful effects on the environments that we can know about. So, for example, in China, there's a very clear issue of pollution and smog. That's an
Yeah.
issue they can tackle. Um, I think an approach to climate change must be based on dealing with the particular effects. But as for the underlying disease, right, rather than just the symptoms, I don't think we can change the general pattern, the overall trend. Especially with, and not to sound cynical, but while climate change activists are, for every moment that they think they've made progress, the ice caps are melting, and countries like Russia want to take advantage of being able to exploit these precious and vital minerals that are going to be in the poles, the Arctic, North Pole. America wants in on it. Canada wants in on it. Even China wants in on it. And they don't want in on it simply because they're greedy, but because it will ultimately contribute to the greater wealth of mankind and humanity as a whole.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen about mineral wealth locked in the ice or whatever. I don't. Maybe it's like on the ground
Also,
underneath the ice.
fossil fuels most importantly. So I mean, there is a we are on the precipice not of arriving at zero emissions, but an age of hyper industrialism, which will probably accelerate climate change. And I don't see how we can stop this. It's like it's almost kind of like certain. I don't want to mention the word because it'll just confuse, but It's almost like this kind of fatalistic idea of capitalism some people have. It's already happening. You can't stop it. It's just going on too fast. It's happening in ways you haven't even noticed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that obviously, if we want to turn things around, there need to be drastic changes done. So, for example, veganism was my jumping off point to talking about that because something or other along the lines of 50% of land use when it comes to agriculture is dedicated specifically to growing animals.
Yeah, well,
And
there's a few reasons for that. Um the first reason is obviously that meat is a superfood. You don't need to consume as much meat in terms of total mass as you do non-meat to get the same amount of nutrients. The second reason is obviously that people love meat. People love eating meat. In the same way, people love air conditioning. You don't actually need air conditioning, but it makes life easier. Meat is the same way. Um, it makes life better. People want meat. People have a demand for meat. Now, do we have wasteful meat? I agree. We waste a lot of meat. We have a lot of pointless meat. We have a lot of pointless food in general. It's not just meat that's incriminated. I would love for a revolution in our food consumption.
Based.
Thank you, Based Sock.
About
Appreciate
to
it.
make some shawarma.
thank you,
Thank you.
Besa.
Yeah, thank you. I would love for a revolution in our general food consumption, but you have to get your priorities in order. So, if you're saying we should become vegan to help the
Well,
climate,
I'm not
no, I know.
that's
But if one were
for
to say that,
veganism,
if
but
let me,
yeah,
if
even meat reduction of meat consumption
right,
is gonna
sure,
play a big
if
part.
one were to say that, your first obstacle is the following fact: physically, what you're saying is possible. But if people were the same as physical objects, we wouldn't even be in the situation in the first place. People will not accept changing their diet or their lifestyle for some kind of ends like this. People just won't. It's part of their lives. It's part of their livelihood. People are too concerned as it is with getting by, with raising families, with going to work. They're not going to accept it. The world is not going to accept it.
That's not going to be instantaneous. Obviously, when if we're comparing the project of building a socialist society and versus the project of building a more sustainable society through reduced carbon emissions, you can talk about like renewables, but uh, let's say like you set up direct and like cheap and affordable and tasty uh, vegetarian or vegan food the same way that like you have a McDonald's on every corner, you have
yeah,
a vegan Donald's or
people
whatever
will
next to the
resist. People
McDonald's.
will resist this. So when it comes to something like socialism, I don't think a socialism will gain traction in America by telling people they have to radically transform everything about their lives. I think socialism will assume the form of a populism in America, and probably in the form of like a land reform. Like we will just give people don't want to think about these things, and they don't want to have to radically change everything around
Or like
them.
lawn gardens would be nice, decolonializing like the lawn and the suburban like neighborhood stuff
It
like
it
that.
it ultimately depends on the people. I think American people are very suspicious and hostile toward attempts from the top down to implement political agendas and visions. I think the AOC approach and the approach of socialists thus far has been a complete failure and is a complete brick wall. It's not going to accomplish
Yeah,
the.
now I would say that the US historically, especially after World War II, has probably been one of the greatest forces of fascism in the world through Gladio and Condor and Cyclone and everything like that.
Yes, I agree. Fascism after World War II has taken the form of an instrument of a global American imperialism. But still, the American people are a real people. Um, who are not just sinful, evil people. Real people.
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't smear the people with the actions of the government.
Yeah.
I think that that public relations has a strong aspect to it. Like people have kind of psychologized the masses in a way they can understand how to keep the political conversation from being about issues and being more about drama. You know what I mean? Culture wars, and the counterculture movement, and everything like that. Seymour Hersh, yellow journalism, got it down to a science pretty much. And so that's going to be a very powerful thing. But I think that if we rebuild local communities and rebuild our institutions, that could, at least serve as a base of power from which to further develop like
Yeah.
more class consciousness.
So the issue is I don't know what communities are being referred to here. Um, Usually, these communities are gentrified kind of neighborhoods of young millennial activists, and they're a tiny minority of the majority necessary to win power. I think the decisive task for communists in America is building a movement with executive ambitions. Even if you don't believe you're going to become president, you have to have a scope and scale worthy of executive central power. And in order to build such a movement, you can't relate to people like activists. You have to relate to people as people just living their lives, their own lives, and who will only be able to afford to give support to you in very small, very, very small ways. But those small ways can add up, and those small ways are the stuff of real revolutions in history. So it's very important not to have grand visions of change at the local level. Um, it's more important to cultivate a sense of small trust with the people, the majority, um, slowly gaining their trust and slowly being a source of leadership and guidance for them. And this not only requires leading the people, it requires learning from the people and humbling yourself before them. So that's a very important distinction I think I would draw.
Yeah. Well, I think someone that thinks that they're done learning is, like one of the biggest idiots. There's like the Chinese word for teacher is, or for teacher is like it has the word student within it. So I think that's an
Yeah.
interesting concept. But that you're never done learning, that you've never filled your brain up with knowledge and it's too full. That if you're bored of like learning or listening to people, that at that point probably need to reevaluate. But yeah, all right. So I guess I got out of the conversation and talked about the stuff that I wanted to talk about. It's just the two things.
Okay.
Just veganism itself as it relates to carbon emissions, just the science and the data on that and how you feel about that. And then the other thing about whether you're conflating between having some view of good and bad and whether that means that someone can understand your view of good and bad.
All right.
So anyways, I appreciate you bringing me on. Thanks so much. Hope you have a great rest of your stream
All right. Bye-bye.
and nice to meet you. Bye.
Bye.